Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? My wife was talking to one of her best friends earlier this week, and she was telling me afterwards, like, we got to talking about some subject or another because this other friend of hers is also a writer, and they were talking about how she would write a certain idea for a book versus how I would write it, and they both at the same time said mechs, like there would be mecha in it. They got a laugh out of that. I was like, no, there absolutely would be. And I can't remember if this is what they were talking about or if my brain is just editing this because I'm reading a book about it. But my thinking was if I was ever to write an historical fiction about the Civil War, I would add mechs to it. And then I stopped and I thought, I could have sworn I read a book in that vein. So I was trying to detangle that, and I suddenly remembered this entire series of books called The Clockwork Century by Cherie Priest, which are very well done, but not all my favorite. I would give the series overall like an above average rating, but I think it rates higher than that. It probably just says more about me in my particular taste than it does about the series itself. The first book, Bone Shaker, came out in 2009, and the series is, I think it's done. I want to say that there are like 7 or 8 books in total, but some of them are novellas. They happen chronologically in between the others. They've all got like quirky, steampunky names. They are very American. They're set in a slightly different 1800s America, where the Civil War has gone on for like 20 years. Technology has advanced to the appropriately aesthetic steampunk level. And in each book, there's a different set of core characters. There's a different machine that the antics center around, and weirder and weirder stuff happens. The series is this the right word? It's anthological in nature, but like I said, every book has kind of a different core of characters to settle around, but they're all connected. Um, and sometimes you double back and you get to meet other characters that become the star of one book when they were just like kind of mentioned or a side character in another. So let's run through them real quick. I'll give you the rundown and then I'll give you my 2 cents on them. Bone Shaker, even though it has an airship on the cover, the machine in this one is a subterranean drill. The premise is that in the 1860s, early 1860s, with the Civil War kicking off, and America exploring Alaska and somebody finding gold in the Klondike, this guy in the Pacific Northwest, Leviticus Blue, invents this, he calls it his incredible bone shaking device, this subterranean drill, which is supposed to make it easier to drill or dig through the Alaskan tundra and find gold in the Klondike. But he, on his test drive, he goes and crashes it through the basements of a bunch of banks in Seattle, robs the banks, and then hits a vein of underground gas that the locals just come to call the Blight. The Blight fills the area and starts turning people into zombies. I don't think they ever use the word zombies. They definitely don't in the first book. Maybe they do elsewhere in the series, and I just don't remember. They call them rotters. But as a result, 1860s Seattle becomes a zombie-infested hell, and there's constant blight gas coming up out of the ground, turning people into rotters. We're given to understand that this blight gas is connected to the volcanic system up in that whole region of the continent, and so there's a constant supply of it. The people at the very extreme edges of Seattle have built a wall around it because apparently that can work for protecting things. They build a wall because the blight it's so heavy that it can only rise so high. So if they've got this wall, then the gas can't run over it. However, it does also infect the local water supply. So there are support industries that pop up. There's like a water filtration plant that they operate to make sure that the blight infected water is filtered and they're safe from it, because you can drink it, you can distill it, and in other ways it can hurt you. But that's the start of the first book. That's the setting. All of this stuff is prologue. Leviticus Blue, he disappears after this, and he leaves Seattle in ruins, and he leaves a wife and a very young son named Zeke. in his wake, and they kind of become social outcasts because they're connected to this guy that destroyed their city. Fast forward 15, 16 years, and Zeke gets a wild hair about going into Seattle to see what he can find out to kind of clear his family name and stuff. And his mom stays, she stays behind. She finds out that he left without her permission, and she's got to go into the city after him, and she's got to tell him the truth about what happened to his father. From there, there's some exploration into what the blighted city of Seattle looks like and how there are survivors inside, and they live in an underground town, but they got to have gas masks on, and the filters have to be of a certain quality, and resources are scarce, and she finds survivors, and she finds a crime boss at the middle of all of it. Like, there's a lot of really cool elements to it, but I've read Bone Shaker twice, a couple of years apart, and by the end, I got to the end of it, and I was like, I really wanted this to be more exciting and more gripping than I found it to be. It was all technically very sound, but it didn't do it for me back then the way that I wanted it to, which was a shame. But it was enough to keep me reading when later installments in the series came out. In 2010, she released 2 books. There was one of those novellas called Clementine, and that had 2 focal characters. There was Croghan Beauregard Haney. He was an escaped slave who ran an airship. The machine is an airship in this one. And he's kind of like a renegade sky pirate, and the Union and the Confederacy both want this guy for crimes that he's committed against them. And the other main character is a woman named Maria Boyd, who I guess in real history was an actual Confederate spy. But she's become so well known and so famous that she can't be a spy anymore. Everybody recognizes her, so she instead goes to Chicago and takes up a job with the Pinkertons, and she becomes a proto-Secret Service agent, but effectively like a private investigator type, and she's got to go track down Croghan Haney. There's mention of what happened in Seattle, but this book mostly takes you to other parts of the continent, and you get to see a new machine and new characters, and you start to understand that this is what the main tenor of the series is going to be like. Technically, the 3rd book, if we're going by chronology, is called is this Fiddlehead or Tanglefoot? One of them is about like a demon-possessed robot, and the other is about a steampunk computer. So they're short, and one of them is the one that comes between Clementine and the full 3rd book, the full 2nd book, whatever. You see how confusing this is? Whatever. But my favorite book in the series is called Dreadnought. Main character in this one is a woman named Mercy Lynch. She's a nurse in a war hospital in Richmond. She's a Confederate, so is her husband, but her husband dies, and she gets word of it. She also gets word that her father, who lives in Seattle, is sick, potentially dying, and she's got to go square some things with him. But she hasn't talked to him in a while. She's got beef because he's an inventor and an engineer and stuff, and he has supplied war instruments to the Union. And so there's cross sides of the Civil War issues there. For anybody who might be concerned about this, and I'm certainly not, I just care about great fiction. I think, if I remember right, Cherie Priest is from Tennessee, and so she plays this with a very deft hand. Writing characters that are Union, writing characters that are Confederate, whatever. Like she treats it as like, here's a backdrop, and I can draw up like really good characters on either side of this line and fill them out and everything, and just give them stakes, give them a purpose and whatever. The story then is about Mercy Lynch trying to get from Virginia to Seattle on this giant steampunk monster train called the Dreadnought. Much like Bone Shaker, the machine on the cover isn't the one that you actually see in the book. Instead, you get a Confederate mech that pops up for one scene, and it's called the Hellbender. And I remember even when I first read this book in 2010, I was like, can we get a Hellbender book, please? Damn. But the stuff that she does with the Dreadnought is cool, too. She even gets a pass through Salt Lake City, and there's 1 or 2 jabs in there about Salt Lake City. Isn't that where all them Mormons live and them people with all the wives? And, it's 1880s, accurate. So, but that's there, and she goes in and gets to Seattle by the end and talks to her father. Her father, by the way, this is what one of my main complaints is about the series. As cool as it is and as generally accessible as it is, it still feels like it was mostly written for a female audience with female sensibilities. Longtime viewers of the channel will know what I mean by that. Not a bad thing. It's just written more for that audience. And the stuff that I, as a guy reader, would find much more engaging, it never really comes to the surface in the level that I would want it to. Case in point, Mercy Lynch's father is a guy with, he's such a badass name. His name is Jeremiah Swackhammer. And he's got this cool tech that he uses to repel rotters in Seattle, and just this giant dude with like a freaking electric lightning gun. Like, he's just, can I have a Jeremiah Swackhammer book with the Hellbender, please? Ah! But anyway, that's Dreadnought. Future installments in the series, you get Ganymede. That's about a submarine, the Hunley submarine. Not necessarily featuring Hunley as a character, but you get a submarine off the coast of New Orleans. And then one of the other novellas that I haven't read is called Jacaranda. I believe that's about a hotel on an island off the coast of Texas, off of Houston. And I found that one on Audible. That one and Clementine in the audio format are exclusive to Audible. And I think Clementine is only available in hardcover. And for a while there, it was super special order. It was like this hardcover novella that was $25. That's why I never bought it. But when it came out on audio, I grabbed it there instead. And so you got different price points and different ways of getting it. Like I said, I owned a paperback of Bone Shaker at one point, and it was fine and good. I don't feel like it really lived up to the promise of what the cover was selling me. But then again, it also might have something to do with my own personal tastes and what I would want of a book with that setting versus what Cherie Priest was really writing towards. But it sounds like she had great success with it, which is saying something, just because steampunk, as cool as it looks, is still a very niche genre with a niche audience. I wish it had broader appeal. Unfortunately, it doesn't. But she established herself as one of the bigger names and the heavier hitters with steampunk through this series. And she did it in a very American way, writing about not just one particular conflict or one particular geographic area, but playing with a lot of things and making them overlap in a cool way. Me personally, I think I could see myself writing a Civil War alternate history thing with mechs that are written down to that level, and it would be kind of in the vein of what I did for Answerable Courage, which is still under review over at ARC Press. I didn't do a whole ton to dress up the tech in that book, but I added a couple of things that didn't historically exist and gave them a semi-plausible reason for existing. I would do something similar with the aesthetic and the world building of such a Civil War book. But the main reason that I would write such a thing is kind of the same reason that I wrote Answerable Courage, is to write an engaging fictional narrative that moves at a really good clip, at a thriller's pace, and gives people a familiarity with 85 to 90% of the facts of what happened. I would have protagonists on both sides of the line. I would have an array of different machinery, and I would try to mostly reflect the give and take of the different battles, and the machinery I invent would just really be there to write something that was suited to the battlefields. Like, have mechs that could help them move more quickly or more adeptly through swampy areas or through wooded areas and so on and so forth. I would have like a really awesome ironclad battle with the Monitor and the Merrimack. You wouldn't have to do too much that's different with those, but I could give them a complementary fleet of similarly engineered ships that could just really make that battle bigger and sexier. Kind of like what Naomi Novik did with the Temeraire series. Like, she wrote the Napoleonic Wars with dragons, but you don't spin 9 books out of that by sticking exclusively to the script that history gave you. And she went way bigger in scope and scale than what actually happened. And she wrote a great fantasy series as a result. So this is kind of a backdoor exploration of how I would write something in this vein, but it is also a recommendation for what Cherie Priest wrote with this Clockwork Centuries series. If you're into the audiobook side of things, my library has a lot of the graphic audio productions for these. Not all of them got the graphic audio treatment, but there's plenty of them that have that whole like full cast narration and sound effects thing going on, which for a series like this that has a heavily visual element implied in it, if you're going to do an audiobook, that really just fills it out and amplifies it in a way that makes it just much more immersive. So check that out. Check out the Clockwork Century. Content-wise, I think she might drop a couple of S-bombs here and there. I don't remember any sexual content, like overly descriptive gore or violence or scenes. Like you get zombies, you get death, you get Civil War era battle injuries, but she doesn't play it up too much for grotesqueries sake. She wrote a good series. There were times when I wish the individual installments were much more gripping for me as the ADD male reader, but I don't know. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.